just to orient you. On the very outside of the adrenal gland, these are the ones that sit on top of your kidneys. There is, and you might have trouble seeing it, but there's a capsule on the outside. It's more of a pink layer. And then you see where it gets darker purple under it? I know it's subtle. That starting there all the way to this light area in the middle is the cortex. So the capsule is just like some connective tissue on the outside. But then you have a thick cortex, and then the middle is the medulla, adrenal medulla. Okay, so you've got capsule on the outside, cortex, and medulla. And I was hoping to get through this in lecture today, but just to give you an overview of the next lecture on this. The cortex, well, the capsule doesn't make any hormones. It's just for protection, around the organ. But the cortex makes like 30 hormones. They're all steroid hormones made from cholesterol. Okay? And you are only responsible for the main one, cortisol. Oh no, I take that back. I'm sorry, that's not true. You're responsible for 3 hormones, which I'll get to in a minute, but they're all steroids. So we'll go through those in a minute. And then the medulla is where you make adrenaline or epinephrine. And it's related hormone, noradrenaline or norepinephrine. And you might remember norepinephrine from 204, where you would have learned about norepinephrine with the sympathetic nervous system, because that's the neurotransmitter it releases. But in the adrenal gland, they're usually talked about as hormones. And they usually don't use epinephrine. You can, but it's adrenaline is what they call it. So adrenaline is made here. Adrenaline is not a steroid hormone. It's made from an amino acid. This whole organ is all about stress. This is your stress gland. When you're stressed, you release hormones from your adrenal gland. You release, and like I said, we'll go over this in lecture again. But if you're in an emergency, like a fight or flight emergency, your life's in danger, something like that, or you release adrenaline from your medulla. It's very fast acting. Your fight or flight is part of your fight or flight response, is to release adrenaline. So it causes your heart rate to go up and your blood pressure to shoot up, and you release more glucose, and all these things are going to help you fight or run away. So that's the medulla. So on this slide is very nice because the medulla is clear. You can really see it. On your slides, maybe you can't. It's hard to see it sometimes. Right, so that's the medulla. The cortex, even on a good slide, there's still some details that aren't always that easy to see, and that is that the cortex itself is divided into 3 zones, and you do have to know them. I wrote them on the board. I don't know if you can see in the dark here, but they're all also in your book. You do have to memorize their names. Okay, they're not very pretty, but there's the darker layer. I'm going to show you on high power in a minute too. The darker layer under the capsule is called the zona glomerulosa. And you will, for lecture and lab too, be required to know the main hormone it makes is called aldosterone. We'll talk about it in lecture. It's for regulating sodium in your blood. So if you don't have enough sodium in your blood, you release aldosterone. It decreases the sodium levels. Okay, and then most of the cortex, like between my fingers here, under that dark area, most of it is called the fasciculata, the zona fasciculata. And it makes, the main hormone it makes is cortisol, which is another stress hormone that increases your blood sugar levels. So cortisol. And then right around the medulla, down here, is what's called the reticularis, zona reticularis. And it produces actually testosterone, the same hormone made in the testes. And its function in coming from the adrenal gland is not entirely understood, but we'll talk about that in our next lecture. So aldosterone, cortisol, and testosterone, they're all steroid hormones made in these 3 zones. And just like adrenaline, they help you deal with stress. But these are for long-term stress. So when you're in an emergency, you release adrenaline. But if you're under long-term stress, you know, weeks, months, you switch to steroids because they last longer. Anyway, what do you have to know for lab? Let me go to higher power, maybe you can see this better. So I will use this slide, probably this very same slide, and it will be on lower power because you have to be able to see the layers, but you know, there's the capsule out there. This is the glomerulosa layer. It's kind of darker. And then you get down into the fasciculata layer. And then as you go on down, well, you get to the reticularis layer. Okay, so how are you supposed to know where one ends and the other begins? Well, let me flip back to the previous magnification and give you an easy tip for that. And that is basically that I would recommend that you learn these layers of the cortex just by location. I'm not going to try to trick you by putting it on the border between the two. You know, so just learn right under the capsule. That's the first layer, the glomerulosa. For the fasciculata, you know, it goes like from here to here. So I'm going to put it in the middle. And usually in the middle of it, it's kind of lighter. So, you know, I'll put it right in the middle. I'm not going to put the pointer like here where it's hard to tell. So it'll be way in the middle. That's the, I'm getting myself mixed up. Fasciculata layer, where you make cortisol. It's the biggest layer. And then for the reticularis layer, I'm just going to ask you right near the medulla. You know, so just outer, middle, and inner. Just go by location. Not because if you're trying to go by, is it dark stain, light stain, dark? You know, it's difficult to do that. So those are the three layers of the cortex. Okay? And you know, for your lab practical, remember I ask you anything on that objective sheet I gave you. Plus, recall that I could ask you to name a hormone that's made in that area. So I might say, name this area of the, I probably won't tell you it's adrenal gland. I'll say, identify this region, be specific. So, you know, this would be worth 2 points. Every question on your lab has 2 points. If you put adrenal cortex, you'll get 1 point. But the be specific part is, you'd say zone fasciculata. Okay? And then I might ask you to name one hormone made there. And cortisol would be probably the best. It's the only one you have to actually memorize. There are other similar ones like hydrocortisone and others, but that's the easiest one. And then, you know, if I put the pointer here, same thing, name this region, be specific, adrenal medulla for full credit. There's no subdivisions of it. And then name a hormone, you say adrenaline or epinephrine, or noradrenaline or norepinephrine. Okay, is that clear? And if I ask you what that pink thing is on the outside, that's the capsule. There's no hormone made there. Are you all okay with this slide? If you have a decent slide, it's not that bad. But I looked around in your trays last week, and I had trouble, so I'm assuming you will too, with some of the adrenal